The ancient hologram flickered one last time before dying completely. Dr. Kilana stared at the empty space where moments before, impossible images had danced in the air. Bipedal creatures with forward-facing eyes standing beside massive ships. That dwarfed anything in the current galaxy. The symbols carved into the stone around her matched perfectly with ruins she had found on 17 other worlds. "More fairy tales, Doctor?" The voice belonged to Ambassador Thylex, whose crystalline form cast rainbow patterns across the excavation site. His tone carried the same dismissive quality that had become standard whenever anyone mentioned the forbidden topic. Kilana's tentacles trembled as she gathered her equipment. 300 years of research, and still the Galactic Council refused to acknowledge what stood right in front of them. The evidence was overwhelming, scattered across thousands of worlds in a pattern too precise to be coincidence. Yet every report she filed disappeared into bureaucratic darkness, every discovery labeled as misinterpretation or wishful thinking. The ruins on Kepler 7 were older than most known civilizations, yet they showed signs of recent maintenance. Tools made from materials that shouldn't exist lay beside symbols that repeated across half the galaxy. Most disturbing of all were the mathematical equations carved into solid rock, formulas that her best scientists claimed were impossible yet, somehow described advanced physics with perfect accuracy. "Look at this!" Kilana projected her latest findings into the air between them, star charts showing the progression of disappearances across the Outer Rim territories. 17 systems in the past year alone, each one going silent with the same mysterious pattern. No debris, no survivors, no explanation that made sense to the Council's military minds. Thylex's form shifted colors, a sign of agitation among his species. Pirates? Mechanical failures? There are dozens of reasonable explanations that don't require invoking ghost stories about mythical warrior races. But Kilana had heard the final transmissions from those doomed worlds. Panicked voices speaking of ships that appeared from nowhere, moving with impossible grace through space. Descriptions of beings that fought with technology beyond anything in the Council's databases. Always, in those last desperate moments, the same word whispered across the communication channels: humans. The word was forbidden in official discourse. 3 centuries ago, the Council had declared it a harmful myth, a dangerous fantasy that distracted from real threats. Children who spoke of humans in their games faced correction. Scientists who suggested human involvement in unexplained phenomena found their funding cut. The systematic erasure of human references from historical records had been so thorough that most citizens genuinely believed they were dealing with fairy tales. Yet the evidence kept accumulating. Ancient battlefields where the weapon signatures matched no known technology. Derelict ships built to accommodate bipedal crews with specific proportions that appeared in artwork across dozens of unconnected civilizations. Energy readings from the silent zones that defied explanation, suggesting power sources that operated on principles the Council's best minds couldn't grasp. Kilana activated her private communicator, using encryption codes that technically violated Council regulations. Her network of researchers spanned 40 systems, archaeologists and scientists who shared her growing certainty that the galaxy's greatest mystery was hiding in plain sight. Their collected data painted a picture that would terrify the Council, if they ever acknowledged it. "The pattern is accelerating," reported Dr. Nexon from the Vega colonies. 3 more systems went dark this week. Same energy signatures, same surgical precision. Whatever is taking these worlds isn't destroying them. The populations are simply gone. Similar reports came from across the network. Not random attacks by desperate pirates, but systematic removal of entire civilizations with technology that seemed almost casual in its overwhelming superiority. The attackers left infrastructure intact, power systems running, even food still warm in some locations. They took only the people, leaving behind mysteries that the Council refused to investigate. The AU breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A maintenance worker on Titan Station discovered a hidden chamber while repairing atmospheric systems. Inside, perfectly preserved by advanced stasis technology, lay archives that dated back 4,000 years. The language was unknown, but the mathematical principles were universal. What they revealed changed everything. Kilana stared at the translated documents with growing horror. Detailed records of a galactic civilization that predated the Council by millennia. Technical specifications for ships that could cross the galaxy in days rather than years. Weapons that could crack planets or rearrange stellar matter at will. And controlling it all, a species that called itself human. The records spoke of an empire that spanned millions of worlds, built by beings who had mastered not just space travel, but the fundamental forces of reality itself. They had reshaped entire star systems to suit their needs, created artificial worlds that housed billions, and developed technology that made them the undisputed masters of known space. But power had corrupted them. The later records described a civilization that had lost its way, treating other species as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. Entire worlds stripped bare to feed their endless expansion. Cultures wiped out to make room for human colonies. The galaxy bled under their dominion until something finally brought them down. The Great Reckoning, they called it. A civil war that tore human civilization apart as competing factions turned their terrible weapons against each other. Star systems burned in the crossfire. Entire regions of space became uninhabitable graveyards. When the fighting finally ended, the survivors retreated to the galaxy's edge, swearing never again to repeat their ancestors' mistakes. But they had not died out. The final entries spoke of watchful guardians, humans who had learned from their failures and chosen a different path. They would watch from the shadows, intervening only when necessary to prevent other species from walking the same dark road that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. Kailana closed the file with trembling appendages. The implications were staggering. For thousands of years, humanity had been watching the Council's rise to power. They had seen the systematic conquest of weaker species, the exploitation of resources, the gradual transformation of the Council from a peaceful alliance into something approaching the old human empire. The disappearances in the Outer Rim suddenly made terrible sense. Not random attacks, but surgical removals conducted by beings who remembered what unchecked expansion could lead to. The Council had triggered something ancient and implacable, something that had been waiting in the dark spaces between stars, for exactly this moment. She looked up at Thylex, who was still dismissing her findings with the same arrogant certainty that had doomed so many civilizations before them. The Council would not listen. They never did, until it was too late. But somewhere in the darkness beyond known space, patient watchers were finally stirring. The myths were about to become reality, and the galaxy would never be the same. Fleet Admiral Koreth pressed his scaled hand against the tactical display, watching as another system winked out of existence. The red warning lights that had once indicated thriving colonies now showed only empty space. 50 billion souls across 37 worlds, and not a single distress signal or escape pod to mark their passing. The war room of the flagship Eternal Dominion buzzed with activity as officers from a dozen species tried to make sense of the big impossible. Zentari mathematicians calculated trajectory patterns that led nowhere. Hivari technicians recalibrated sensors that insisted nothing was wrong. Nephrite strategists proposed theories that crumbled under basic scrutiny. "Show me the Talos system again," Koreth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 4 centuries in service to the Council fleet. The holographic display shimmered, revealing a star system that should have housed 8 billion Zentari colonists. Instead, the planets orbited in perfect silence, their cities still powered but completely empty. Lieutenant Commander Rix stepped forward, her insectoid features clicking with nervous energy. She had led the reconnaissance mission that discovered the first evidence of what they were truly facing. The memory still made her compound eyes dim with remembered terror. The infrastructure is intact, Admiral. Power grids functioning, automated systems running their normal cycles. But every living being is simply gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of how an entire planetary population could vanish so completely. The data streams continued, flowing across the displays, each report more disturbing than the last. Orbital defense platforms still manned their positions, their weapons fully charged and operational. Space elevators continued their automated cargo runs, carrying goods to empty stations. Even pet animals remained in their homes, well fed by automatic systems, as if their owners had simply stepped out and never returned. But embedded in the central command structure of each world, the reconnaissance teams had found messages. Always. The same format, always in perfect galactic standard, written in symbols that predated known civilization by thousands of years. The text was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications. You were warned. The Council chose ignorance. Now you will learn why the universe speaks our name in whispers. Each message bore the same signature. A simple symbol depicting a bipedal figure standing against a field of stars. The same symbol Dr. Kalana had found in ruins across the galaxy, the same image that appeared in the forbidden archives the Council had spent centuries trying to suppress. Koreth studied the energy. Readings from the final moments before each system went silent. The signatures were unlike anything in their databases, suggesting technology that operated on principles their best scientists couldn't begin to understand. The power levels involved were staggering, yet the attacks showed surgical precision that spoke of complete mastery over forces that could level continents. "Assemble the full Armada," he ordered, his decision carrying the weight of desperation disguised as confidence. "Every ship in the Council fleet, every ally we can call upon. If something out there thinks it can challenge galactic civilization, we'll remind it why the Council has never been defeated." The response was overwhelming. Over 2,000 ships converged on the staging area, representing the combined might of 17 major species, massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets, hung in formation beside swift raiders designed for deep space reconnaissance. The firepower assembled could sterilize entire star systems, and their coordination represented the pinnacle of military evolution. The Armada's advance into the Silent Zone began with typical Council confidence. Their formations were perfect, their communication networks redundant, their sensors scanning every cubic meter of space for threats. They moved like the apex predators they had always been, secure in their technological superiority and numerical advantage. The first ships disappeared 3 hours into the advance. The process was so subtle that the command staff didn't notice initially. Icons simply faded from the tactical display without fanfare, without distress calls, without any indication that something was systematically removing the Council's most powerful warships from existence. By the time they realized what was happening, they had lost over 200 vessels to an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't fight. "Emergency scatter pattern," Koreth commanded, but his orders came too late. The surviving ships found themselves isolated in small groups, their formation broken by an opponent that struck like lightning and vanished before retaliation was possible. The careful coordination that had made the Council fleet invincible became a liability as communication networks failed and tactical awareness collapsed. The first clear visual contact came from the battlecruiser Vigilance Might. Captain Thorne's startled report echoed across all remaining frequencies, describing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about space warfare. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, single vessel, estimated length 12 kilometers, hull configuration unknown. It's not on any database." Her voice carried growing alarm as she continued. "Admiral, this thing is bigger than our entire battle group, and it's moving like a fighter craft." The tactical display lit up with impossible readings. The enemy vessel accelerated and decelerated in ways that should have turned its crew into paste, yet it maneuvered with grace that suggested complete mastery over gravitational forces. When Council ships fired upon it, their energy beams seemed to pass harmlessly through its hull as if they were shooting at a hologram. But when it returned fire, entire sections of the fleet simply ceased to exist, not destroyed in conventional explosions, but removed so completely that space itself seemed to collapse inward to fill the void they left behind. Koreth watched in growing horror as ships that had served faithfully for centuries vanished without even debris to mark their passing. The pattern repeated across 7 systems as the Armada spread out in desperate search patterns. Each task force, confident in their local superiority, found themselves facing opponents that operated on principles beyond their understanding. The enemy ships appeared from empty space like nightmares given form, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before effective counterattacks could be mounted. Communication intercepts revealed panic spreading through the surviving crews. Veterans who had faced down the galaxy's worst threats now spoke in terrified whispers about ghosts that walked between stars. The carefully maintained discipline that held the Council fleet together began fracturing as basic assumptions about reality proved false, but it was the message that finally broke their spirit. Transmitted simultaneously to every surviving ship on all frequencies, spoken in a voice that carried absolute authority, tempered by infinite weariness. I am Admiral Hayes of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You have entered human space in violation of treaties your species signed before your current civilizations existed. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your aggression. The word that had been forbidden for 3 centuries now echoed across their communication networks. Humans, not myths or legends, but real beings with technology that made the Council's greatest achievements look like crude tools. The implications hit Koreth like a physical blow as he realized the magnitude of their civilization's delusion. They had not been facing pirates or unknown aliens. They had been systematically dismantled by the very species they had declared mythical, beings who possessed power beyond imagination and had finally decided that the Council's expansion would go no further. In less than 12 hours, the most powerful military force in galactic history had been reduced to scattered survivors desperately seeking escape from an enemy they couldn't comprehend. The stars themselves had gone silent before human ships, and now the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to face the Watchers who had been waiting in the dark. The emergency klaxons fell silent as Captain Thorne realized her ship was no longer under attack. The Vigilant's might drifted powerless in the void, its engines dead and weapons systems offline, yet somehow still maintaining life support. Around her, the bridge crew stared at their displays in stunned disbelief as readings showed impossible things happening to their vessel. A massive shape materialized outside the viewport, so large that Thorne's mind struggled to process its scale. The human ship stretched for kilometers in every direction, its hull seeming to bend light around itself in patterns that hurt to observe directly. Unlike the angular designs of Council vessels, this craft flowed like liquid metal, organic curves suggesting technology that had evolved rather than been built. "Something's happening to the hull," reported her tactical officer, his voice barely above a whisper. Through the reinforced transparasteel, they watched as sections of their ship's armor simply dissolved, replaced by some kind of extending mechanism that connected the 2 vessels with impossible precision. The process was completely silent, defying everything they knew about space construction. The boarding tunnel that formed between the ships was unlike anything in Council databases. Instead of crude airlocks and mechanical seals, the connection flowed like living tissue, adapting perfectly to both hull configurations. Atmospheric readings showed the foreign vessel maintaining perfect environmental conditions without any apparent life support systems. When the inner airlock finally cycled open, Thorne found herself face to face with the myths made real. The human, who entered her bridge moved with fluid grace that spoke of perfect control over every muscle in his body. He was taller than most council species, with the lean build of someone who had spent decades in variable gravity. His skin bore scars that told stories of battles across multiple star systems, and his eyes held depths that suggested he had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. What struck Thorne most was his casual indifference to their toxic atmosphere. Most species required elaborate environmental suits to survive in alien conditions, yet this being breathed their air as if it were perfectly natural. The implications of that biological adaptability sent chills through her exoskeleton. "I am Commander Davis of the Terran Defense Corps," he said, his words automatically translated by technology more advanced than anything the Council possessed. His voice carried absolute authority, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Your species has been interfering in affairs beyond your understanding. That interference ends now." He approached Thorne's command station with movements that seemed relaxed, yet somehow predatory. Every gesture suggested coiled power held in. Perfect check. The casual confidence of someone who knew he faced no real threat. When he placed a small device on her console, the ship's computers immediately recognized it despite its alien design. "This contains information your leaders have spent centuries trying to suppress," Davis continued, his scarred features showing no emotion. "The true history of this galaxy, including your species' role in recent events. Study it carefully. Your survival may depend on how quickly you can accept uncomfortable truths." The data crystal pulsed with soft light as it interfaced with their systems. Thorne watched her displays flood with information that challenged everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. Star charts showing human presence across regions supposedly unexplored. Technical specifications for technology that operated on principles their best scientists considered impossible. Historical records that predated the Council by thousands of years. But it was the images that truly broke her understanding of reality. Vast cities floating in space, each one housing billions of beings. Ships that dwarfed entire moons, moving between stars with casual ease. Weapons that could ignite suns or snuff them out with equal facility. And controlling it all, humanity at the height of its power. "We ruled this galaxy once," Davis said, following her gaze as she stared at the impossible recordings. "Every world you call home, every system your species has colonized, every trade route your merchants use. We built it all, explored it all, claimed it all as our birthright." The records showed the gradual corruption of that early empire. What began as exploration and peaceful expansion slowly transformed into something darker. Alien species treated as resources to be exploited, entire worlds stripped bare to fuel human industry, cultures wiped out to make room for colonies that served only human interests. "Power corrupts," Davis continued, his voice carrying the weight of ancient shame. "We became the very monsters we once fought against. The galaxy bled under our dominion until we finally faced the only enemy capable of stopping us, ourselves." The Great Reckoning played out across Thorne's screens in scenes of unimaginable destruction. Human factions turning their terrible weapons against each other in conflicts that consumed entire star systems. Artificial suns going nova from weapons that manipulated stellar matter. Planets cracking apart under gravitational forces unleashed by opposing fleets. When the Civil War finally ended, the survivors faced a choice. They could rebuild their empire and repeat the same mistakes, or they could choose a different path. The decision shaped the next 3,000 years of galactic history. "We withdrew to the galaxy's edge," Davis explained, his eyes reflecting memories of that long exile. "We dismantled our remaining fleets, abandoned our colonies, and swore never again to impose our will upon unwilling worlds. But we did not simply disappear. We watched. We waited. We ensured that no other species would walk the path we once traveled. The implications hit Thorn like a physical blow. For millennia, humanity had been observing the Council's expansion, measuring their actions against the memory of their own dark age. They had seen the systematic conquest of weaker species, the exploitation of resources, the gradual transformation of a peaceful alliance into something approaching the old human empire. "The Outer Rim territories," she whispered, understanding, flooding through her. "You didn't destroy them. You relocated them." Davis nodded grimly. "Surgical removal and placement in prepared sanctuaries. Every being from those worlds now lives in safety beyond your reach, free from the Council's expansion. We gave your leaders warnings, subtle at first, then increasingly direct. They chose to ignore us." He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Council territories marked in red, expanding steadily outward like an infection. Human space, marked in blue, vast regions that officially didn't exist on any council chart, and between them, a growing buffer, zone of empty systems that had once housed council colonies. "You have 48 hours, Davis said, his tone carrying the finality of absolute judgment. "Acknowledge our existence, agree to immediate negotiations, begin the process of returning conquered territories to their original inhabitants. The alternative is the complete dismantling of your civilization, conducted with the same precision that claimed the Outer Rim." He turned to leave, then paused at the airlock entrance. "Your Admiral Koreth was a good soldier, loyal to his species, and confident in his superiority. He died believing he was protecting civilization from unknown threats. In a way, he was right. The threat to your civilization has always been yourselves." The boarding tunnel dissolved as mysteriously as it had formed, leaving Thorn alone with information that would shatter the Council's understanding of their place in the universe. Around her, the bridge crew stared at displays showing the true scope of human technology, power that made their greatest achievements look like children's toys. Outside the viewport, the massive human vessel began to fade from visibility, not departing but simply becoming undetectable to their sensors. The message was clear. Humanity moved through space as easily as council ships moved through atmosphere, masters of technologies that operated beyond conventional understanding. Thorn looked at the data crystal still pulsing on her console, knowing that its contents would change everything. The myths were real. The legends were true, and the galaxy's secret guardians had finally stepped out of the shadows. What happened next would determine whether the Council learned from humanity's mistakes or shared their fate. The Council chamber erupted in chaos as Captain Thorn finished her report. Delegates from 17 species shouted accusations, denials, and demands for immediate military action. Ambassador Thylex's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. As he addressed the assembly, his voice cutting through the din with practiced authority. "Impossible. This human claims our entire understanding of galactic history is false, that we face an enemy with technology beyond imagination. I refuse to believe that our civilization's greatest achievements are somehow inferior to mythical beings from children's stories." But the evidence was undeniable. Thorn's data crystal contained detailed technical specifications that their best scientists couldn't begin to understand. Power generation systems that seemed to tap directly into stellar cores, propulsion methods that ignored conventional physics, weapons that operated on principles their databases classified as theoretical impossibilities. High Counselor Vortron of the Hegemony stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. As the eldest member of the assembly, his words carried weight that could shift entire civilizations. "I have lived for 800 years. I have seen our species rise from barbarism to galactic dominance. But I remember stories my grandmother told, legends of the time before our first starships, when the galaxy was ruled by beings of impossible power." The chamber fell silent as Vortron activated his personal archives, displaying historical records. that most delegates had never seen. Ancient treaties written in languages that predated known civilization. Star charts showing territorial boundaries that made no sense in current context. And everywhere, references to humanity as the galaxies, acknowledged masters. We called them the firstborn, Fortran continued, his voice heavy with the weight of suppressed memory. The species that discovered faster than light travel, that mapped the star lanes we still use today, that established the trade routes our merchants depend upon. We thought they were extinct, casualties of their own success. We were wrong. The tactical displays around the chamber showed the current military situation with brutal clarity. The Council's mightiest armada, 2,000 ships representing centuries of technological advancement, had been reduced to scattered survivors in less than a day. Not through overwhelming force, but through surgical precision that suggested complete mastery over the fundamental forces of warfare. "They're toying with us," whispered General Korax of the Hivari Collective, his compound eyes reflecting the horror of military professionals who had just witnessed the impossible. Every engagement, every loss, every tactical maneuver, they could have destroyed our entire fleet in minutes, but instead they chose to demonstrate their superiority step by step. The 48-hour ultimatum hung over the assembly like a death sentence. Acknowledge human existence and agree to immediate negotiations, or face the complete dismantling of Council civilization. The terms were non-negotiable, delivered with the casual confidence of beings who possessed the power to enforce any decision they made. But it was the arrival of the human fleet that finally broke the Council's spirit. The warning came from deep space monitoring stations, sensor readings, that defied rational explanation. Massive energy signatures approaching from the galactic edge, moving at speeds that should have been impossible for objects of such enormous size. When the first human vessels finally became visible, they challenged every assumption about space, travel, and engineering. These ships were different from the ones that had dismantled the Council Armada. Larger, older, and somehow more alien despite their human origin. They moved through space like living things, their hulls shifting and adapting to conditions in ways that suggested technology indistinguishable from biology. Some appeared to exist partially outside normal dimensions, visible only as distortions in space-time that hurt to observe directly. The lead vessel was a monster that dwarfed entire cities. Its hull stretched for dozens of kilometers in every direction, yet it maneuvered with the grace of a small fighter craft. As it approached the Council's core worlds, gravitational sensors detected mass readings that should have collapsed the ship into a black hole. Instead, it hung in space like a casual demonstration of humanity's mastery over the fundamental forces of reality. I am Admiral Hayes of the Terran Expeditionary Force. The voice that echoed across all frequencies carried authority that seemed to bend reality around itself. For 3,000 years, we have watched your species develop, hoping you might learn from the mistakes we made in our youth. Instead, you have chosen the same path of conquest and exploitation that once led us to nearly destroy the galaxy. The transmission included historical data that left the Council delegates stunned into silence. Visual records of human civilization. At its peak showed accomplishments that made their greatest achievements look primitive. Cities that spanned entire star systems. Ships the size of moons that moved between galaxies like toys. Weapons that could rearrange stellar matter or create artificial suns at will. But the records also showed the price of such power. Enslaved worlds stripped of resources to feed endless expansion. Entire species wiped out to make room for human colonies. The gradual transformation of a proud civilization into something monstrous and inhuman. We became what we once fought against, Hayes continued, his words carrying the weight of ancient guilt, masters of technology that could reshape reality, yet slaves to our own worst impulses. The galaxy bled under our dominion until we finally faced the only enemy capable of stopping us, ourselves. The Great Reckoning played out on screens throughout the Council chamber. Human factions turning their terrible weapons against each other in conflicts that consumed entire regions of space. Artificial suns going nova from experimental weapons. Planets cracking apart under gravitational forces that treated solid matter like water. When the destruction finally ended, the survivors faced a choice that would define the next 3 millennia. They could rebuild their empire and repeat the same mistakes, or they could learn from their failures and choose a different path. "We took an oath," Hayes said, his image now visible on every screen in council space. His face was ancient, yet ageless, marked by experiences that spanned geological time periods. Never again would any species be allowed to walk the path we once traveled. We have kept that oath for 3,000 years, intervening only when absolutely necessary. The human ultimatum was simple in concept, but devastating in implementation. Complete dissolution of the Galactic Council as a governing body. Return of all conquered territories to their original inhabitants. Submission to human oversight of all future interstellar expansion. The alternative was relocation to carefully prepared sanctuary worlds where council species could live in peace while humanity ensured they never again threatened galactic stability. "You have the remainder of your specified time limit," Hayes concluded. "Use it wisely. The choice you make will determine whether your species learns from our mistakes or shares our fate. Choose quickly, choose well, and remember that the universe has been patient with your errors only because we have been watching." The transmission ended, leaving the council delegates to stare at displays showing the true scope of human power. Hundreds of massive vessels hung in space around their core worlds, each one capable of reducing entire civilizations to memory. They had not come to conquer, but to judge, and their judgment was final. In the end, the decision was inevitable. Faced with the complete annihilation of everything they had built and the revelation that humanity had been judging them for millennia, the Council chose survival over pride. The surrender came not from their military leaders, who had died believing they faced unknown threats, but from the political leaders who finally understood the magnitude of their civilization's delusion. The age of council dominance was over. The age of human guardianship was about to begin. 20 years had passed since the day the stars went silent, and Dr. Kailana still remembered the moment when everything changed. She stood now in the reconstructed council chamber, no longer a symbol of galactic dominance, but a carefully neutral meeting place where disputes could be resolved without warfare. The changes were subtle but profound, reflecting humanity's gentle but absolute authority over galactic affairs. The human who sat across from her bore little resemblance to the warriors who had dismantled the council fleet. Admiral Hayes looked more like a scholar than a conqueror, his ancient eyes reflecting wisdom earned through millennia of watching civilizations rise and fall. His presence was calming rather than threatening, yet everyone in the chamber understood the immeasurable power he represented. "Your archaeological work has been invaluable," Hayes said, reviewing Kalana's latest reports on recovered human sites. "The galaxy's younger species deserve to understand their true history, not the sanitized version the old council preferred." The transition had been surprisingly gentle. Humanity had not sought conquest or revenge, instead implementing a careful restructuring of galactic civilization designed to prevent the rise of any single dominant power. The old imperial territories were broken up and returned to their original inhabitants, while former council species were relocated to worlds specifically prepared for their needs and preferences. Ambassador Thylex, the former skeptic who had once dismissed humans as myths, now served as a liaison in the new order. His crystalline form no longer pulsed with the aggressive colors of dominance, instead showing the steady hues of someone who had learned to accept uncomfortable truths. The transformation in his species had been remarkable, their natural arrogance, tempered by the humbling knowledge of their place in the universe. "I still struggle to understand," Thylex admitted during one of their regular conferences. "Your power is absolute, your technology beyond our comprehension. Why show mercy to those who denied your very existence? Hayes regarded him with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of star systems. Because we remember what it was like to be where you are now. We remember the intoxication of power, the belief that might makes right, the gradual slide from civilization into something monstrous. We failed that test once and nearly destroyed everything we touched. The human gestured toward the wall displays, which now showed the true extent of galactic civilization. Thousands of species thriving under human protection, each developing along their own paths without interference or exploitation. The old patterns of conquest and subjugation had been replaced by careful guidance that encouraged growth while preventing the accumulation of dangerous power. We won't allow that to happen again, Hayes continued. Not to you, not to anyone. The galaxy has suffered enough from the ambitions of apex predators. It's time for something better. The new order operated with principles that the old council would have found incomprehensible. Instead of military might determining territorial boundaries, human arbitrators resolved disputes through careful analysis of historical claims and cultural needs. Trade flowed freely through star lanes protected by invisible guardians who intervened only when absolutely necessary. Most remarkably, the former Outer Rim colonies had been returned to their original locations. The populations who had lived, in terror of council expansion, found their worlds improved by subtle human terraforming techniques, atmospheric processors that worked without visible machinery, soil enhancement that increased agricultural yields without environmental damage, water purification systems that operated on principles their scientists still couldn't understand. They were never destroyed, explained Commander Davis during one of his rare public appearances. We simply relocated them to safety while preparing more suitable homes. Every being from those worlds is alive and thriving, free from the Council's expansion. We gave your leaders warnings. They chose to ignore us. The revelation that humanity had been actively protecting threatened species for millennia had transformed galactic politics. Civilizations that had blamed mysterious disappearances on pirates or natural disasters learned that they had been saved by guardians they never knew existed. The psychological impact was profound, replacing fear of the unknown with gratitude toward protectors who asked nothing in return. Dr. Kilana's archaeological expeditions had uncovered the full scope of human presence throughout galactic history. Ancient ruins on thousands of worlds revealed a species that had been quietly tending galactic civilization for longer than most races had existed. They had prevented wars that would have consumed entire sectors. They had guided the development of technologies that improved life for billions. They had ensured that no single power could dominate the galaxy as they once had. The younger generation grew up with a completely different understanding of their place in the universe. Children learned about humanity not as myths or monsters, but as the distant guardians who ensured that countless species could flourish in peace. They studied the true history of the galaxy, understanding both the heights that civilization could reach and the depths to which it could fall when power became an end in itself. The old stories were right, in a way, Hayes reflected during a private conversation with Kilana. We are myths made real, but not the terrible demons of ancient legends. We chose to become something better than what we were. The transformation in human society itself had been equally remarkable. The descendants of the beings who had once ruled through fear now governed through wisdom. Their cities existed in dimensions that overlapped normal space without intruding upon it. Their technology had evolved beyond crude mechanical devices into something approaching pure thought made manifest. Yet they remained recognizably human in their fundamental nature. They felt joy at successful harvests on distant worlds. They mourned when natural disasters claimed lives they couldn't prevent. They celebrated when young species achieved breakthrough, discoveries that brought them closer to true sapience. The power that had once corrupted them had been transformed into a tool for nurturing rather than dominating. The economic transformation had been swift and thorough. The old council's resource extraction industries simply ceased to exist, replaced by human replication technology that could produce any material needed without environmental damage. Worlds that had been strip-mined for rare metals found their landscapes restored overnight. Species that had sold their labor to survive discovered that their unique cultural perspectives were valued more highly than their physical contributions. "We learned that true wealth comes from diversity," explained Director Stone during a conference on galactic economics. "Each species brings something unique to the cosmic community. Your mathematical intuition, the Hivari collective consciousness, Nephrite artistic vision. These are treasures beyond any physical resource." The military implications of human guardianship were perhaps the most profound. Wars between species became impossible when both sides knew that patient watchers would intervene before significant damage occurred. Weapons research shifted from developing more efficient ways to kill toward improving quality of life. The massive defense budgets that had consumed galactic resources for millennia were redirected toward exploration, education, and cultural development. Some species struggled with the transition more than others. The proud warrior cultures found purpose in human-sponsored exploration missions that mapped unknown regions of space. The merchant classes discovered that their skills were invaluable in distributing resources fairly across thousands of worlds. Even the former council military found roles as peacekeepers and disaster relief coordinators under human guidance. "The hardest part was accepting that we were never really in control," admitted General Corax during his retirement ceremony. "We built fleets that could crack planets, commanded technologies that seemed godlike, convinced ourselves that we were the apex of galactic evolution. Learning that we were children playing with toys while adults watched from the shadows was humbling beyond description. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity's relationship with their own past. The museums they established didn't glorify their ancient empire or hide from their mistakes. Instead, they presented honest examinations of how power could corrupt even the most well-intentioned civilizations. School children from across the galaxy visited these exhibits, learning from history's greatest cautionary tale. "We were once what you might have become," Hayes told a group of young council delegates during their orientation. "Masters of technology beyond imagination, rulers of half the galaxy, convinced of our own righteousness even as we committed atrocities that shame us still. The choice between wisdom and power is one every species must face. We can help you. Understand the consequences, but ultimately you must choose your own path." The new galactic order established humanity as the ultimate arbiters of interstellar relations, but they ruled with the lightest possible touch. Most citizens went about their daily lives without any direct contact with human authority. Trade continued. Exploration expanded into previously forbidden regions, and scientific advancement accelerated as humans shared carefully selected portions of their vast knowledge base. The selection process for shared technology was both careful and compassionate. Humans would not provide weapons or tools that could be used for oppression, but they freely shared medical advances, agricultural improvements, and communication technologies that enhanced quality of life. Each species received exactly what they needed to thrive without gaining the power to threaten others. "We measure our success not by what we control, but by what we protect," Hayes explained to the assembled galactic community. "Every world where children play safely, every species that develops according to its own nature, every conflict resolved through dialogue rather than warfare. These are our true achievements." The transformation was complete, yet ongoing. Humanity had evolved from conquerors to guardians, from dominators to protectors. They had learned the most difficult lesson any powerful species must face, that true strength lies not in the ability to impose one's will upon others, but in the wisdom to know when restraint serves the greater good. The galaxy continued to grow and change under their watchful protection. New species achieved sapience and were welcomed into the cosmic community. Old grievances were resolved through patient mediation. The vast diversity of galactic civilization flourished as never before, each culture free to develop its unique gifts without fear of exploitation or conquest. And in the depths of space, on worlds whose names appeared on no public charts, human, children learned the same lessons their ancestors had struggled to master. That power without wisdom leads to corruption, that dominion without compassion breeds cruelty, that the greatest victories are won not through conquest, but through the patient work of building something better than what came before. The stars no longer went silent before human armadas. Instead, they sang with the voices of 1,000 thriving civilizations, each free to pursue their own destiny under the watchful protection of the species that had learned to master not just the cosmos, but themselves. The myths had become reality, but they were gentler myths than the galaxy had ever dared to dream.